Session, or basically up until we close today, we're really starting to look at genomic technology. So any kind of workshop at the moment on new technologies which are available to Angus producers at a breeding level has to involve some discussion around genomics. So this session, if you like, we're just going to go through and give you an outline of the technologies that are available, discuss some of the logistics when you test with Angus Australia with some of the genomics, and also go through and outline some of the recent and upcoming developments regarding the genomic technology that's available. For those of you that might be all that familiar, just starting off giving you an overview as what genomics is. I've got up there's lots of different definitions, but this is a bit of a layman's term definition. When we're starting to talk about genomics, we're really talking about technologies which go through, analyse an animal's DNA and inform us about the genetics of that animal. So we're talking about, when we say the term genomics, we're talking about DNA-based technologies. And at the moment there are several different ways that we're utilising genomics as an Angus industry, and predominantly throughout the DNA services which are offered by Angus Australia. There are four main areas. So utilising DNA parentage, genomics for DNA parentage verification, for the management of genetic conditions. So there are 10 recognised genetic conditions within Angus Australia. We have tests available for 8 of those. The management of what I've termed their qualitative traits, so traits which are under the control of one or very few numbers of genes, so things like myostatin or double muscling, and coat colour, be it red-black, and more now for genetic improvement of our important production traits. So they're the four, I guess, key areas where we're currently utilising genomics. Now, just by way of feedback and a show of hands, how many of you are utilising genomics within your operations at the moment? It's about half of you. How many of you are using it for parentage verification? Most of you. For genetic conditions? Again, most of you. Any of you using it for the qualitative traits? Matthias? And what about for the genetic improvement of the production traits? So the I50K or the GGP-LD? A handful of you. So I guess we've got, amongst the DNA services, all our different members are utilising it in different ways and tailoring it to the benefits to their operation. Within this system, the DNA services which are available to us are constantly evolving. So, and probably a little bit evolving too quickly for my liking, so we just get things all bedded down, and then we have a discussion with our DNA service providers, and we have a new service or a new cost or something coming up. So it is changing very quickly. The best place to find details of the current services when you go to test is through the Angus Australia website. In this registrations menu option, down in this DNA prices, is where the current DNA services and prices will always be available. So before you go and test, I'd suggest you go in and have a look just to check what the latest services and prices are. So some of the logistics, just to touch on them, in terms of what DNA samples can you collect when you're recording with Angus Australia and doing some genomic testing. There are 4 different types of samples which you can submit. So of those, hair is the most common. So taking the tail hairs, and importantly, we're not after the hair itself, but we're after the hair molecule, the nodule, follicle is the word I was looking for. So right up at basically the hair root. But you also have the option of sending in some semen and some tissue samples. So tissue with here, these TSUs, or the tissue sampler units, which are offered by Allflex technology, which is an ear-notch technology. So you can see this is a picture of these up here, where it takes a little notch out of the ear, a little punch, puts it into a bit of a solution, so a preservative type of solution, a buffer, and you send that off. So that's one option. And then also tissue, which is more for dead calves and things where you can't get other samples, where people are taking, cutting a little bit of snip off the end of the ear, and we can get DNA out of that. So there are 4 different types. Importantly to be aware when you're starting to look at utilising different options, there are some surcharges to some of those sample types. So particularly if you're testing with Zoetis, then there is a surcharge of $5.50 for the TSUs, and with GeneSeq there is a surcharge of $8.80 with semen, TSUs and also the tissue. So it's important to be aware when you're thinking about your sample types that there may be some surcharges. The reason for those surcharges is purely because of the ability to store some of these samples. So one of the requirements that we have at Angus Australia, which we're constantly doing, is going back and retesting samples. So you'll do a test now, and in a couple of years you'll go back and try and do another test on that same sample, on the same animal. The ability to store some of these is not nearly the same as hair. So particularly for the TSUs and the tissue and also the semen, we actually take DNA and store the DNA out of those samples. And that comes with an extra cost, which covers off on those surcharges. So it's just important to be aware of that when you're looking at the sample types. As I said, hair is by far the most common. We have an increasing number of people using TSUs through to probably the ease of collection and the ability to do it at birth rather than later in an animal's life, but there are some additional costs associated with those. The quality of the DNA which you get out of them is all very comparable. So from that side of things, there's no particular benefits. It's just whatever works best for your operation. Some other things around just understanding the DNA testing pipeline. So in particular, what happens to the samples when you put them in the mail to when you get your results back. So to give you an idea of that, so you're sitting at home, you take your samples, you fill in your order form and you send those off to Angus Australia. Now, so the first thing to note is you need to send those samples to Angus Australia, not direct to the labs. When that arrives at Angus Australia, there are some important QA checks done. And the most important is that the animal, or the sample, is automatically linked to the animal on our database. So that is a key thing that we need to make sure that we know for which animal that test is being done and for which that sample relates to. So that's the first QA check, and that's done right at the start. There's also checks around your paperwork and how suitable your samples are and those type of things. We then send that off to the DNA lab, so we generate the test request, send off those samples to the DNA lab. They also do some QA checks when it gets to them, so they check the paperwork, the IDs and everything which are in our test requests. Now, some important things to note around where that DNA lab is. If you're testing with GeneSeq, that lab is in Brisbane, but if you're testing with Zoetis, that lab is actually in Kalamazoo in the US. So the samples go off to Brisbane, to Zoetis, and then they get put in the mail, or on the aeroplane, I presume, go over to Kalamazoo. So it is quite there's a bit of distance for these samples to travel. The DNA lab then goes through, does their testing, returns the results to Angus Australia, plus the samples. So the samples all come back and get stored in, we have a DNA storage facility up at the office here up in Armidale. They all get placed in there, any surplus sample. Plus the results come back and get loaded onto our database. From there's a lot of analysis done depending on the test request which you've requested. So if you go through, if the parentage verification is all done in the office up here at Angus Australia, the genetic condition results get loaded and put through our gene probability analysis. The genomic information goes into our breed plan analysis and we get updated EBVs coming back. So there's a lot of analysis done, and the important, really key thing is because it's gone through this pipeline, we know for which basically which animal the results relate to, so that it all gets analysed properly within the system, and then and then the results come through and get delivered to you as the member. Now, the reason to not only just give you an understanding as to what's going on, but importantly, if you're trying to look at the efficiency of your DNA testing, the information is currently sent to the labs, in the case of GeneSeq, once a week. So it gets bundled up and sent off on a Monday to GeneSeq. To Zoetis, it goes twice a week. So it goes on a Monday and a Wednesday. Very shortly, that'll be the same for GeneSeq. But if you're looking at when you send it to Angus Australia, if you're trying to shorten your time frame, understanding that it goes in the afternoons of the Monday and the Wednesday, so making sure it arrives at the office shortly before that will ensure that it's the shortest possible time frame. Okay, so that's some logistics. Also now just to go through some of the recent changes. There's been a lot of changes to the DNA services which are available through Angus Australia in the last 12 months. Most of these have been communicated, but I just wanted to touch base and make sure you're aware of them. In particular, we've now got a far more expanded range of DNA services. So that involves a few things which you probably won't be that noticeable to you, such as that we have far higher density parentage panels. Now, by density I mean the number of SNPs or the number of gene markers which are included. So previously the parentage included 140 SNPs. That's now gone out to, with GeneSeq, to 200 and is about to go to 500, and with Zoetis out to 280. All that means is we're getting far more robust parentage results from our parentage verification. So it doesn't mean the old ones weren't robust, but it's doing a far better job of that parentage now. We also have far greater add-on capability. So when you're doing low density testing, so you're doing an I50K or a GGP-LD, the ability to add on genetic condition testing at lower cost than doing as a standalone has been greatly increased. Also far greater bundling options, so the ability to package up different test requests and do things at cheaper costs, and a wider range of genetic conditions. So we haven't had any new genetic conditions, but of the 10 conditions which we recognise, we've got tests available for a greater range than we did before. A big change to be aware of is the change into some of our DNA service providers. So for those that have been members for some time, you'll note that we traditionally have partnered with the University of Queensland, the Animal Genetics Lab up there, and Zoetis. As of September 1st, Genomic Australia, a new company, had a full corporate takeover of the University of Queensland lab. So what you'll see now is the DNA service providers have changed. So we're now dealing with Genomic and Zoetis. From a practical point of view, nothing changes in the short term. So in terms of the testing, the same tests are available with Genomic as to what they were with the University of Queensland at the same price. The same staff are in the lab up there, so it's pretty much the badging on anything you see will now say Genomic Australasia rather than the University of Queensland. You can also use the same collectors. So if you've got University of Queensland DNA collectors at home, you can still use those and send those through that pipeline. Over time it will change significantly, which I'll talk about in a second, but in the short term it's really just a change to the name. There's also been some changes to the way we invoice for DNA services. So before we had multiple kind of things that we invoiced for DNA services, so such as the cost of the genotyping, some processing costs, all those type of things. For simplicity, is trying to make it as transparent and as simple as possible. Now we charge just one overall price for our DNA services to try and simplify that. There have also been some notable price reductions in the last 12 months. So across most of our services, the price has come down. Most notably, important to be aware for those of you looking at doing I50K testing, so low density testing with Zoetis, the price of the I50K at the start of September came down from $69 to $57 GST inclusive. So over time, and for those that have been around again a little while, it wasn't that long ago that we were doing HD50K for $95. So in a matter of 2 or 3 years, our prices have come down of the DNA tests that are available, and will continue to do so, we would hope. So that's kind of the changes which have happened over the last 12 months. To give you a snapshot of some of the upcoming changes, the first thing to note is we will see a new range of DNA services available from Geneseq. So at the moment it's basically just a change in the name of the lab, but we are now negotiating a new service agreement and we have a whole lot of new options. So we would hope when that's finalised, which is likely probably to be, it's over coming months, but possibly from the start of next year onwards, there'll be a whole range of new services available from Geneseq. The most significant of those is the availability of a new test called the Angus GS test. Now for those of you who keep up with North America, you'll notice American Angus recently announced the outcomes of a project which they've done with Neogen, which is the owner of Geneseq, where they've developed a custom high density DNA test or chip for Angus cattle. So the actual SNPs within that have been customised to be of most benefit or most informative for Angus cattle. We've been successful in being able to get a sub-licence for that. So that will be a high density, it's a 50K, a 50,000 SNP product, which will come on, and I would envisage it will be a very similar price to the i50K, if not a little bit cheaper. So that'll be a significant development in the range of services which are available to us. We are also, as part of our software development, trying to look at far more or better ways for you to order and track your DNA testing. So in particular, looking at the ability for you to log in with your register, your username and your password, and order your DNA tests electronically, but then also go in and see where the testing's up to. So are your samples at the lab, or at Angus Australia, are they at the lab? Where are the results up to? So you can track exactly where that testing is up to. So don't have a time frame on when that's going to become available, but we'd be pretty disappointed if that wasn't available in the next 12 months. So a far more modern interface. We do also now have a new DNA storage facility. So at the moment, and that's at Angus Australia, so we've got a fully fireproof building up there which can store DNA samples. At the moment, we're just collating all the samples from the different labs that's been done historically, and all the new tests, the samples come back to us. We would hope over the next little while that we should be able to offer a service to members to just store DNA samples. So if you want to go through and collect samples on all your animals, but not necessarily test them, you can either do what you're currently doing possibly and chuck it in a shoebox and put it under the bed or in a filing cabinet, or you can send it off and we'll have a secure DNA storage facility at a very low cost that'll be a service to members. Some of the upcoming changes, which just to kind of foreshadow, is I think we'll start to see parentage, breed and sex verification becoming more routine. So by that I mean, as we do any of our DNA testing, we'll probably get these automatically. So both the parentage, the breed verification of the sample and the sex. Now hopefully you don't need a DNA test to tell you what the sex of your animals are, but this is more around the QA of this stuff. So you'll be surprised the number of times that people submit scrotal circumference measurements on animals recorded on our database as females and all those type of things. So there are errors which occur both on farm when you're filling in your registration details, both in the office as well. So as much of this, it's picking up QA issues and making sure the information on the database is as accurate as possible. Two other things which I would hope to see, and we continually liaise with our DNA service providers about this, is lowering the cost of our DNA services and also decreasing the turnaround time. This is some work which has recently come out of the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit, up here at Armidale, and it looks at approximately 11,500 animals where they're looking at 4,000 SNPs or gene markers. And so I guess giving us a picture of the genomic relationship between different animals of different breeds. So you can see each of these different dots basically represents animals of a different breed. So over here we have our Bos Indicus cattle, so our Brahmans, our Sanders and our Droughties. We have our Wagyus up here as a totally different genomic kind of population. Have our Euros at the top, so our Limos, our Simmentals and our Charolais. Our Herefords, our Angus and the Murray Greys just on the top of this Angus population, and our Shorthorns down the bottom. So how DNA technology, the kind of stuff it's enabling us is if you take a DNA sample on an animal or on a piece of meat, for instance, so either in a processing lab or if you go down to the local pub down here and they're selling you an Angus steak, you can take a little sample off, send it away to a lab, and it will basically show you on this picture what the genomic relationship of that sample is to these animals. So we can see if the animal's sitting and we put it in the middle of this Angus population down here, that it is an Angus animal. So that offers us with quite a lot of benefit going forward for registration, maintaining the integrity of our herd book, but also for verification of branded beef programs, and more so now for verification of live animals. So when people are marketing weaners as Angus, whether they are Angus or they're just black and they have a few other things in them. It does also start to raise some other questions as to how do we define breeds. So by that, I suppose, if I asked you what is an Angus, you'd probably come through and start to tell me, well, it's a black-coated animal, it's polled, and certain things about the physical description of that animal. Realistically, our physical description, things like our coat colour and those things, are under the control of a very few number of SNPs or genes. And so we start getting hypothetical things now that if we had an animal which might not have been black and polled,
but it sits right in the middle of this population. So across all our traits, it's quite related to these what we consider Angus animals. Is it an Angus or is it not? How do we define the breeds? I guess it's starting to raise a whole lot of questions, which as an industry we'll need to work through. And I don't profess to have any of those answers, but it will start to raise a few questions in future years around that. So that's just, I'll leave you to ponder that. That's just a snapshot of some of the different things which genomics is starting to offer us. So just some take-home messages before I hand over to Peter. Is the Angus breed is leading the beef industry in Australia with the application of genomics. We have far greater range of services available and also far greater uptake amongst as our membership. We're currently using them across those 4 key areas, but there are either changes that, and I guess it's a constantly evolving space, so there's a lot of changes which have happened in the last 12 months and will continue to happen over the future in terms of the DNA services which are available to our membership.